Native resistance. In the face of all this, many tribes fought back, violently resisting the settlement of Americans in their lands. Sometimes they left their reservations and had battles with the United States Army. This period of conflict between the Native American tribes of the West and the U.S. Army is known as the Indian Wars. In Texas, the Mexicans and then the Americans had been at war with the Comanche tribe for over a generation. The Comanche were fearsome mounted warriors who conducted raids for cattle. They had killed many Texas settlers and were not afraid of battle. In 1864, they fought off an entire regiment of U.S. soldiers under Colonel Kit Carson, an experienced Indian fighter. The Army tried again in 1872 when they attacked a Comanche village by the Red River. Dozens of Comanches were killed, and the Army took over 100 prisoners. The commander, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie, would only let the Comanche prisoners go if they agreed to move on to reservations. The Comanche agreed. This tactic would be used several times with other Comanche villages. By 1874, almost all of the Comanche had been relocated to reservations in what is now Oklahoma. Further west, in Arizona and New Mexico, the Apache fought a vicious war against both the United States and Mexican authorities under their fearless war leader, Geronimo, who led expeditions that killed thousands of Mexicans and harassed American settlements. Always a cunning warrior, Geronimo was caught by the U.S. Army 3 times, but always managed to escape. By the time he was finally captured for good in 1886, his exploits had made him a celebrity. Americans paid money to see Geronimo at fairs and have their picture taken with him. He even rode in President Teddy Roosevelt's inauguration parade, but the government never trusted him. He remained a prisoner of war until the end of his life. Meanwhile, his people, the Apache, would be forced onto reservations. One of the most famous conflicts of the Indian Wars was the Lakota Sioux of South Dakota. The Sioux had once lived in Minnesota, but had gradually been pushed west and moved to different reservations many times. In 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie established the Black Hills region in South Dakota as a Sioux homeland forever. But in 1874, American miners trespassing in the Black Hills found gold. The Sioux made it known the men were not welcome, so the miners asked the U.S. government for help. The government commanded the U.S. Army to protect the miners, prompting the 7th U.S. Cavalry under General George Armstrong Custer, a famous Civil War hero, to be sent into the Black Hills. Custer and his men protected the miners from the Sioux, while the government tried to pressure the Sioux to give up more land in the Black Hills. The Sioux refused to budge. Their chief, Sitting Bull, and war leader, Crazy Horse, were prepared to defend the Black Hills against the army. The Sioux and Custer's 7th Cavalry met by the Little Bighorn River on June 25, 1876. Custer wanted to attack a Sioux village nearby, but he was not aware that there were thousands of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors in the area. The tribes attacked and trapped Custer and his men on the top of a hill. What followed was perhaps the most famous battle of the Indian Wars. The hillside above the Little Bighorn River was alive with activity. The entire area was swarming with native warriors from the Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne, over 2,500 of them, who had all converged on this hill to annihilate the U.S. Army companies fighting under General George Armstrong Custer. The air was torn by the roar of gunfire and the whirring of arrows. Atop the hill, General Custer and 40 of his surviving men tried to maintain some kind of perimeter to keep the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors at bay. Hundreds of soldiers had already died. Firing from behind rocks, shrubs, and even dead horses and men, the remaining soldiers of the 7th U.S. Cavalry knew their time was almost up. A Sioux warrior charged the hill, hollering wildly and waving a tomahawk. General Custer, kneeling behind a fallen horse, fired his revolver and downed the young warrior. "Take that!" he growled. But some of the Sioux were better armed. A group carrying modern Winchester repeating rifles scrambled up the hillside and fired a burst of gunfire at Custer's men. Several soldiers fell, dead or wounded. "Captain Sturgis!" called Custer. "Are you hit?"
"Yes, sir,"
groaned the captain.
"In the shoulder."
A warrior brandishing a knife attempted to charge Sturgis. The captain painfully raised his revolver with his wounded arm and fired, striking the warrior between the eyes and sending him rolling into the grass.
"Still got some fight in me, though,"
the captain called back.
"We're done for, General,"
called another soldier, Private Adams, as he ducked bullets.
"If we're gonna die here, Private, let's take as many of them with us as we can,"
called General Custer, reloading his revolver. A volley of arrows came raining onto the hilltop. One struck Private Adams in the foot, driving completely through his soul and pinning him to the ground.
"Ah!"
he cried. Bullets poured onto the hilltop from all sides. 3 of them tore through Private Adams. He slumped over dead onto the grass, his foot still stuck in the earth by an arrow.
"They're gearing up for another charge, sir,"
called Sturgis, crawling toward Custer on his belly through the grass. A band of Sioux were massing together at the bottom of the hill near Crazy Horse, the famed Sioux war leader. Meanwhile, arrows and bullets continued to fly. A group of 6 soldiers tried to break from the hilltop to make a run for it.
"No!"
called Custer.
"You fools, you'll never make it!"
The men didn't listen, fleeing down the hillside. A troop of mounted Cheyenne were on them immediately. The fleeing men were run down by the Cheyenne warriors and killed to the last man. Another hail of bullets rained down upon the hillside. Captain Sturgis was struck in the neck. He fell into Custer's lap, gurgling and gasping. Custer winced. He and Captain Sturgis had fought in the Civil War together and had many adventures, but there was no time for mourning. Crazy Horse and his men were about to make an assault. He lay Sturgis beside him while he breathed his last. Custer waved his revolver in the air.
"Bring it on!"
he shouted. A small handful of men, all that remained of Custer's 5 companies, clustered around him behind his dead horse. At the bottom of the hill, Crazy Horse raised his rifle and let out a fearsome war whoop. A band of 100 Sioux and Cheyenne charged the hill, firing guns and arrows. Custer and his men fired everything they had, but it was not enough to stop Crazy Horse's onslaught. Within moments, Crazy Horse's men covered the hill like ants. The U.S. soldiers who weren't killed immediately tried to flee, only to be run down. "268 men died with Custer. The general would later be found with a single gunshot wound through his head and another below his heart. The death of Custer and the men of the 7th at Little Bighorn was the single biggest defeat ever inflicted by Native Americans on the U.S. Army. Even so, the war did not last much longer. The following year, the Sioux agreed to a peace treaty and went on to a smaller reservation. But the 7th Cavalry would have their revenge. 14 years later, in 1890, the 7th was sent to the Sioux Reservation at Wounded Knee in South Dakota. There were rumors that a Sioux prophet was stirring his people up to attack Americans. The 7th was trying to disarm the Sioux, There are different versions of what happened at Wounded Knee that day, but somehow somebody's gun went off. The 7th Cavalry began firing into the Sioux village, and when the smoke cleared, over 300 Sioux had been shot dead, most of them women and children. The famous chief Sitting Bull was among the dead. This was known as the Massacre of Wounded Knee.